Virtual Time Machine Podcast, Season 2, Episode 3, Part 2. Okay, so far, just to review, we've talked about a case study, which is the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline in Western Canada, which is, if put in place, will lead to a significant expansion in marine traffic off the west coast of British Columbia. And the processes that are in place and the need for a cumulative effects framework in order to unlock our economy while still sustaining our natural environment. Then we talked about the definition of cumulative effects and my perspective that it needs to not just be the environment that we're looking at, but also the interactions of the economy as well as people through culture. Then we talked about what were some of the agents that are driving cumulative effects, and I broke them down for you, some of the examples I provided around marine shipping into two categories, positive changes as well as negative changes. Now what we're going to talk about is the Oceans Protection Plan project to develop a cumulative effects for marine shipping in Canada. That project is broken down into 4 phases. Phase 1 has already been undertaken, started in 2017 and was completed in 2018. And that was an effort to understand the national context. In Canada, we have 3 oceans. We have the Pacific Ocean, Atlantic, and the Arctic Ocean. And so this initial piece of work was to understand nationally what are the concerns related to marine vessel traffic activities, as well as what are some of the larger and more important identified stressors of concern for each of 6 pilot sites that were selected across Canada and in each of our oceans. So they're going to test out this marine cumulative effects framework in each of those pilot areas. So the first thing that they did was look at what are the stressors or the concerns related to marine vessel activities in those areas. That was phase 1. Phase 2 began in 2018 then with that in hand and is proceeding until 2020, which will be next year. And that's understanding the regional context. So this is part of the work that I've been involved in, at least in a consultation phase, and my participation in a technical workshop along with others. So this phase 2, currently in progress, is understanding the regional context. And so it includes a selection of valued components. That's cumulative effects EIA speak for the values, the things that we care about, the valued components for each one of these pilot areas. And then identifying the linkages between the stressors, the things that are affecting them, and the values themselves. This is often referred to in the literature then as the pathways of the effect. And this phase 2 also involves the collection of existing regional data, so they're aggregating all of the data that they have available and identifying the preferred methodology for cumulative effects assessment. So that was the purpose of, I guess, leading towards the development of this report and the workshop. One thing that I think really made clear through the workshop is that there isn't one preferred method, and I've mentioned this before, there's no silver bullet. Well, I'll come back to that. There's 2 more phases to come after this stage. So, and this report that I told you could access, I've given you the link to, is one of the deliverables of phase 2. The reason I'm sharing this widely too is because while this is really important for Canada, oceans are oceans, and this kind of movement is it's groundbreaking, it's innovative, it's important, and it's relevant for all of the oceans of the planet. So even if you're not working in Canada, I think this information, you'll find it highly valuable. So phase 3 is going to be started in 2020 and go for a year, where they'll actually be conducting the regional assessments in each of those 6 pilot areas. And they'll be testing out the development of cumulative effects framework in each one of those areas, seeing what works and what doesn't. And then phase 4 will be the following year, 2021 to 2022, identifying the actions that are needed. So based on implementing the cumulative effects assessments, they'll develop regional management strategies and actions and tools to mitigate the potential harmful effects of marine shipping. And I'm hoping that by then we can also talk about the beneficial implications that we could be working on, not just the negative. Let's not keep focusing only on the things that we don't want. Let's definitely focus on the things that we do want. Now, here's a really cool thing that I want to share with you. As you probably know by now, but if you're not, I'm going to tell you, CE Analytic, the company that I work with, is hosting a cumulative effects conference in Kamloops, British Columbia this spring. You can learn all about that at cfxconference.com. And what's exciting, one of the things that's exciting about that is that Paula Doucette and a representative from one of the Indigenous communities. Paula Doucette is from Transport Canada, and she's sort of heading up the Marine Cumulative Effects Framework project, among other projects. And she will be one of our guest speakers, and she'll be co-speaking with a representative from one of the Indigenous communities that they're working with around reconciliation, to bring this cumulative effects framework into that context. Remember that other part I was talking about the National Energy Board's recommendations to do a better job of consulting on major infrastructure projects with Indigenous people. So it's going to be really, really interesting to hear from them at that conference. Get your tickets at cfxconference.com. So now we're into the last portion of this podcast, talking about marine shipping cumulative effects. And I'm going to focus in on one of the diagrams and then some of the information that follows on that from this assessment report that I'm sharing with you. And it's an interesting way there. It's a difficult thing. Cumulative effects are so complicated. There are many, many different aspects. Lots of different approaches have been used, and so the consultant that was building this report, ESSA, was tasked with trying to sort all that out and figure out, what are the best tools to use in a marine shipping context. And they really came to the conclusion that it really depends on the specific answers that you're trying, or specific questions that you're trying to answer, which is exactly what I often find is that I need a suite of tools. There is no one approach or tool that gives me the answers that I need. So I use many, many different tools. Anyway, they broke it down into kind of a neat matrix of methodological approaches down one side, and then sort of different levels of focus on the other. So it's an interesting way to break out the different potential opportunities. I'm just going to talk a little bit about 3 different approaches that they identified. One they're calling spatial, another they're calling analytical, and then the third is modeling. When I was at the workshop, I spent a little bit of time talking with Darcy Picard, who's the primary author and lead contact on this report. She works with ESSA Technologies in Vancouver. And we talked about this breakout and sort of recognized and both agreed that, there's kind of overlap between these categories. It's really kind of almost impossible to make it all discrete and fit into a perfect matrix. But these categories are useful and instructive. And I just want to give you some examples from the different components and relative to the examples that they provide, and then a number of these that are just sort of my own perspective. So first of all, they looked at spatial methods. And in that, what they were trying to identify is, like a spatial map or location of stressors, things that cause change, and valued components, the values that matter to us. And understanding, I guess, the juxtaposition of those two components. In some places, they will have a geographical overlap. In other places, they will be mutually exclusive. Sometimes it's proximity that matters, and sometimes that spatial extent can vary, not only spatially but also temporally, right? So we do different activities on the landscape and in the oceans in different seasons, as an example. One of the examples was that in Vancouver, in the port, in the summertime, there's a lot of cruise ships in there, but cruise ships don't really come to Vancouver through the winter, and so there's quite a difference in that kind of traffic depending on the season. That's an example. And so the tools that they identified for this are things like GIS systems like ArcInfo GIS, QGIS, a tool I hadn't heard of called C-Sketch. These are certainly tools that I use all the time. Digital mapping has become like an absolute mandatory when you're looking at land use planning, marine use planning, and cumulative effects. Got to have it. Absolutely have to have it. One thing that's interesting is there's a website, and I had it up here. I'm just going to pull it up on my screen. www.marinetraffic.com. Put that in your URL and check it out. It's really cool. It uses AIS transponders from ships, and you can actually see where all the ships are, where they're moving. You can look at frequency maps in a particular channel. There are little icons for each one of the ships, and you can click on those and see the details, what kind of a ship it is. Oftentimes, all of the information about it, what country it's coming from, the type of cargo it's moving, all of that. So those would be an example. That's another example, sort of a real-time live spatial tool that you could use to assess, I guess, just where the stressors and the valued components are. On the valued component side, let's talk about on the West Coast, one that's really, really important is the home range of the southern resident killer whale population, or orcas. And they actually move transboundary between the United States and Canada up and down the West Coast. And so you could look at the interaction of those shipping lanes with the home range and habitat of the southern resident killer whales, as an example. The next method or sort of grouping of methods that they identified were what they're calling analytical methods. So I think of those as measures. The spatial methods, the way they were describing them are sort of like maps at one point in time. The analytical method would be measures that we use to look at different things like frequency of activity, or to do risk assessments based on different values and priorities that we hold in different regions. They identified other kinds of analytical methods like weight of evidence, which is just looking at the relative importance of different pathways in a particular region. And so the weight of evidence, one versus the other, some factors may be really, really critical and others may not be. They also identified different data methods, one of which is R statistical software, which is a freely available program that you can download. It's really well documented and used a lot. We use it in our cumulative effects assessments quite often to help tease out the different analytics that are really important. So it's really, that they're looking at the analytics component as being measures that you could evaluate using a number of different tools. And you could do that for the valued components as well as the stressors, and to help you start to connect the dots between cause and effect, right? To identify those pathway connections between stressors and valued components. So they get in each one of these, they provide a table where they give examples. So here's some other examples of analytical methods from the table. It includes regression analysis, regression trees and forests, home range estimation, habitat suitability modeling, those kinds of things. So they give a sort of it's a good document, a good effort. I like what they've tried to do. It's a very difficult task. But they've looked at then sorting that out and trying to evaluate relevance, rigor, and feasibility of using these different approaches in different situations. So there's 3 methods. The first one is that they've identified spatial, the second is analytical, and the third is modeling. And modeling is where I do most of my work. But it's interesting because the models that we build are often aggregates of spatial tools as well as analytical tools. And so that's why I say, like, the lines are a little bit fuzzy. When I'm building up a spatially explicit simulation cumulative effects model for an indigenous traditional territory, whether it's marine or terrestrial, I'm aggregating and using all of those methods, high-end GIS, empirical as well as traditional knowledge relationships of cause and effect between stressors and values, and then using modeling methods, I think what they're calling modeling methods, to then be able to forecast and evaluate changes over space and over time. And so, one thing, you can read the report for yourself and evaluate, but the key aspect of modeling is this ability which they identified to allow us to test alternative scenarios before we actually have to live it. And this is the time machine. This is our virtual time machines. This is our ability to test out a range of management options, to understand the consequences and decide if we like those. The tool that I use for that the most, and I'm always talking about, is the ALCES model, which is a landscape cumulative effects simulator. But I integrate that, as you will know if you're following me, with other tools like the Raven hydrology simulator, or work with other scientists who are doing those linkages. We've integrated regional economic models. We've looked at cultural models that look at things like time on the land and use of language and dispossession of resources and the opportunity to carry out traditional land use. Lots of different tools that combine. What I was pleased to see is that this one thing which is in bold, spatially explicit simulation models which relate stressors to valued components and enable the evaluation of alternative scenarios, are the ultimate cumulative effects assessment method. And that's awesome, because I feel really good about that, because that's what we do. And the ALCES simulator is one really slick tool for doing that. In fact, if you go on my YouTube channel at barryjwilson.online and look for the playlist called Land Use Tutorials, you'll see a series of tutorials sort of looking over my shoulder, and you can see how I use the ALCES model to develop a range of different scenarios, test outcomes, evaluate climate change, all of that stuff. That's all freely available. barryjwilson.online is easy to remember, and that will take you right to my YouTube channel. Hit subscribe, and then you'll get updates of all of these new vodcasts, as well as a number of other videos that I'll be adding there. So really, really cool to see how that came together. If you're new to cumulative effects, this is a good document to sort of give you a baseline. And as I mentioned before, I've got a link along with this podcast for you to just provide your name and email, and we'll give you a download location for that report. It's in draft format right now, so at least at the time of recording this podcast. So keep that in mind, and a final report is about to come. If you have ideas and suggestions that can contribute to improving this work, by all means, please share those with Transport Canada or myself. I guess my 3 takeaways from that component of the modeling methods for assessing cumulative effects are this. You can't isolate one part from the others and fully understand the system. You'll end up with only part of the story, and you're probably going to miss the boat. You can't just consider one point in time. We need to historically look at a reference point, a benchmark. I often use pre-contact, but perhaps you choose a reference point 30 years ago or 60 years ago. And then we need to be able to simulate into the future over time how things might potentially change. So a single static view in time is not enough. We need this capacity to look over time at the simultaneous interactions of human activities and Mother Nature. And in order to do that, it's been my experience over 20 years of doing cumulative effects assessment in Canada that there is no silver bullet. You really need to mix and match the tools depending on the questions that you're trying to answer. And so that's where I really see that there's some real value in this report in helping people understand the range of possible tools. I don't think that's a comprehensive listing they've got there. I've given them some new pieces that they could add in. Another one is that they were missing is the Stella modeling framework as an example. But that publication is going to be useful and valuable. One last thing I will leave you with. If you're interested in doing this sort of complex cumulative effects assessment, being able to simulate a range of different scenarios and evaluate the options spatially, temporally, before you have to make your decisions, which helps you make better decisions. If that's something that you're interested in, I'm going to be teaching that at a workshop. There's a half-day workshop that is on the second day of the CFX conference in Kamloops this spring. So go to cfxconference.com, check out all the information there. You can put your name in the hat there to get updates. We'll send you updates on everything that's going on, but you can see the full faculty of speakers, everything that's available. And if you want to participate in that workshop, when you're buying your tickets, just select the one that says Conference Plus Workshop, and I will look forward to seeing you. Now, I can't have a big classroom when I'm doing this stuff, so there's a limit of 10 seats, so don't wait too long. If you're interested in this, get your seat now because they're going to go fast. All right. I hope you're having a terrific week. And remember that the next episode, where's my list here? The next episode, we're going to be talking about the terrestrial transport of bitumen through pipelines in that case study on the TMX, the Trans Mountain Expansion. Following that, then we're going to look at oil sands extraction and what that means in the northeast of Alberta. Till then, please also do feel free to check out my searchable blog at my website at barryjwilson.com and listen to previous podcasts or vodcasts. I've got them all listed there. There's a number of free items of information that you can download and access. Talk to you soon. All right, moving on to the next part of the while we are talking. Maybe. Oh, can't even log into my own computer because I had cap lock on. The website is called